I've always seen my wife as my closest confidant, someone dependable and trustworthy. So it was a shock when she took a wrong turn and faced the consequences tonight. I was hoping for a bonus, but I had doubts. It was the first time in 3 years I wore my dark blue tuxedo, looking sharp yet feeling out of place, instead of relaxing in my favorite chair with a drink. I was at a fundraiser with colleagues and houses, which was a big social event in our small Midwest town. I'd asked my wife to dress up, and she certainly did. Maybe she dressed too much. She looked stunning, but she was also overly tempting at 35, which was her peak beauty. She was turning heads as she descended the stairs in a revealing maroon dress. Despite her allure, she was mine. I made it clear that I'd rather be at home, but my wife seemed comfortable mingling with the city's elite. She has a natural charm that draws people to her. When I returned from the bar, I found her engrossed in conversation with Senator Thomas Norberto, who is often compared to Tom Sitch. His presence seemed to captivate her like never before. Before leaving, I felt like I was a bystander to her infatuation. I noticed they ignored me, so I stepped in politely and reminded the senator of my seat. He carried on chatting with my wife, so I intervened more assertively and placed drinks between them until he got the message. When he finally acknowledged my presence, he announced he'd leave to find his seat. I was pretty annoyed, so I went back to my place and called him foolish. My wife backed him up, saying I was rude to a senator. I reminded her of our relationship boundaries, but she rolled her eyes. I didn't want to cause a scene, so I dropped the matter. Dinner passed and the band started playing again. I invited my wife to dance, but she said no, so I danced by myself. I was disappointed, but I chatted with others anyway. I kept an eye on the senator, who eventually left for the veranda. I found him there, arm around my wife, engaged in a serious conversation. I tried to intervene, but someone stopped me, warning me not to mess with the senator. They forced me out. I warned him that that was my wife and that he shouldn't be touching her. I was pushed back into the ballroom. The ballroom demanded he get her back. I threatened a scene, and he cursed quietly, turning back to the senator. He'd returned, looking flustered, and said he didn't know what had happened. I grabbed her hand and led her out. The ride home was silent, but I knew it wouldn't last. She unleashed, accusing me of humiliating her. I defended my boundaries and reminded her of our marriage. "You're being a bit possessive, crossing a line or two." She said I was acting like a love-struck teen. She blushed and stayed silent, conceding my point. Our tension affected the kids' dinner, making it awkward. On Wednesday, she insisted on a serious talk, which is never a good sign. It ended poorly. She revealed plans to attend another fundraiser with the senator, calling it a non. When I objected, I questioned whether it was appropriate. She denied any wrongdoing and claimed innocence. I challenged her definition of a date, citing a double standard with her friend Angie. Her reaction confirmed my suspicions that she had issues with Angie, who is known for her charm. She argued that a date with a U.S. senator wasn't the same as a regular date, and that there was a big distinction. "Right, Hess, you can't go out with another guy. We're married, remember?" I reminded her, emphasizing our vows. "You don't own me, Reggie." "Even though we're married," she retorted, "I can do what I want. I'm not saying you're my property, but you're the mother of our kids. I don't want to break up our family." I pleaded, hoping to reach her. "You're being ridiculous," she dismissed, refusing to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation. I was pretty shocked when Hester turned up at the restaurant in a stunning white gown for her date. Our kids were amazed, asking why she was dressed up. She struggled to explain, but I stepped in and told her the truth. As soon as the doorbell rang, I confronted her with a choice, him or us. She opened the door to a security guard, who was standing there with a black limo. She said, "Remember to behave for Daddy," before leaving. I assumed it was her. I was taken aback for a moment before turning my attention to my kids, who needed my attention. I wasn't going to drown my sorrows or drink to excess. I planned a few FaceTime calls, one to my parents, one to hers. The kids enjoyed chatting with their grandparents, starting with Hester's parents. I thought her recent actions would upset them, but we laughed until Hester's absence was noticed. "Where's my daughter?" "Reggie, have you hidden her?" My mother-in-law joked that I should have kept an eye on Hester, who'd gone out with Senator Thomas Norberto. I told her Hester was on a date and expected her back the next day. My in-laws were shocked and couldn't believe I'd let her go. I tried reasoning with her, but she seemed convinced it was acceptable. The kids took over the conversation, which was a welcome distraction. My lawyer told me to communicate and be patient. Later, I called my parents, but my mother was less sympathetic. She recommended a lawyer after a few calls. I ordered pizza, watched a Disney movie with the kids, and struggled to sleep. I was distracted by ESPN in the morning. I made pancakes and bacon, reassuring the kids that their mom would return soon. There was no rush to come home after spending the night with another man. The black limo arrived in our driveway around 1. It was 10 p.m. morning. Our kids and neighbors usually rush to greet their mom, but this time they stayed put, disappointed by her lackluster appearance. She still wore the same dress from the night before, now wrinkled and tired looking. I sat in the living room as she entered, showing no eagerness to greet her. She greeted me, acknowledging our night apart. "You and the kids managed without me," I replied sharply. She went upstairs and asked for a rest and a shower. I raised my hands in mock surrender, realizing our relationship was over. I focused on making things easy for my kids, avoiding becoming a weekend-only father. The question lingered, could I stay until the kids graduated from high school? When Hester finally came downstairs at 7:12 a.m., I'd already made dinner. I mentioned there were leftovers in the fridge. She just smiled a little. The kids sensed there was tension and kept their distance. Hester said I was poisoning their minds. I said I wasn't. I told her how our actions were affecting them and our neighbors. I didn't break up our family. She said I was being selfish. She blamed me for everything. She said it was up to me to work on my ego issues. She said we could heal and keep our family together. But if I kept being petty and nasty, she said, we'd have to go our separate ways. She said I could be Mr. Part-Time Dad, she warned, catching me off guard. I had expected regret, not resistance and anger. "It's 1 in the afternoon, you idiot," I retorted. "You couldn't get enough last night. You needed a half-day fling, huh?" She paused, avoiding my gaze. "We can get past this and go back to how things were. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry, but I needed this for myself and I don't regret it," she said, her tone unapologetic. "That's not an apology if you ask me." I remarked that she was only sorry for hurting me, not for anything else. "It was amazing for you," she said, her voice defensive. My response matched her conviction. "Your actions betrayed our vows and our family." I recounted how I was surprised to find her in our guest bedroom. "We can't move forward unless you try," she pleaded. "No, it's too late now," I clarified, locking her out of the room. I slept soundly that night. The next morning, I continued our Sunday brunch tradition of making Belgian waffles. "She looks rough. I guess she hasn't slept." We sat down to eat. "Maybe you should go out more on Friday nights." He burst into tears and fled to the bedroom, leaving the children puzzled. "Did I say something wrong?" she asked. "No, sweetheart, Mommy probably just missed the waffles," I reassured her. Later on, I was relaxing in my lazy boy watching the Cubs game when the bedroom door suddenly slammed open and Hester stormed in, ranting incoherently. I tried to calm her down, saying, "Honey, I can't understand you with all the drooling and spitting." She started crying and accused me of making her seem promiscuous to her parents. "What a drama queen," Mommy Elise asked, joining the scene. I exchanged a glance with Hester, who composed herself and sent the kids to their rooms before confronting me. She demanded to know. "I saw no reason to hide it from your parents since you were just following a senator to a fundraiser," I explained. "If they agree with me, it's not my fault. My mom had a similar reaction, so watch out next time she's near." "No, it's not like that." She began, then stopped abruptly. It was quite an experience. I interjected, if looks could eliminate, I'd be a stain on the chair, but it doesn't bother me much. I gestured for her to move so I could see the TV, and she hurried out of the room for the following 2 weeks. I slept in the guest room, and I told the kids that I had a cold and didn't want their mother to catch it. I figured Eliza had figured out my deception, but she kept it to herself. 1 year. One night, an hour after Hess had gone upstairs, I returned to our shared bed and climbed in softly. When the alarm went off the next morning, she snuggled up next to me. "It's time to come to your senses," she muttered. She tried to touch me, so I placed my hand on her forearm and drew her hand away. I adjusted our position so that we were facing each other on the bed. Certain acts are its best to make direct eye contact. "Before I decide to sleep with you again, you'll have to get tested and provide me with the results," I said softly. "You could be willing to trust Senator, but I am not." Tears welled up in her eyes. She appeared to be about to say something, but then decided not to. She just nodded, which told me that she and the senator weren't using protection. The situation is getting pretty interesting. I had originally planned to stay until the kids finished high school, which would be another 14 years or so until Nate headed to college. I loved them both and was willing to put up with it, but the idea of a long-term relationship with someone else. I couldn't bear the thought of being close to her, especially in the same house, despite worrying about my reputation. My feelings for her had dwindled over the past 2 weeks. I no longer felt the sadness I once did when I saw her leave the bed. My own pain stopped me from offering comfort. Who is she now? The woman I married would have understood my disapproval of her seeing someone else. Hester and I met in college, started dating 3 months later and married within 2 years. She worked as an actuary. A job requiring precision and honesty are traits that balanced my spontaneity and humor despite our differences. I was celebrating 50 years of marriage when Senator Thomas Norberto unexpectedly became a part of our lives. 10 days after returning to our shared bed, Hester handed me an envelope. Inside was her clear bill of health. She whispered, "Hope you're satisfied." I replied, "I may never face Dr. Sanj again. It's not my fault." She hissed, "Stay faithful and you won't be embarrassed." But I couldn't respond as she walked away. I pressed on and asked how often the senator had contacted her. She started to answer, but I cut her off with a gesture and a grimace. She handed over her phone, and I found texts and calls from him, but no evidence of further meetings. "Damn it," I exclaimed. "We're on." She agreed, and that night she showed me affection in bed. I was just fulfilling my needs, though. I didn't have feelings for her. I knew she was trying to win me back, but I was preoccupied. When I suddenly came home, people in the neighborhood started to talk. Some men looked at me with sympathy, while women gave me a knowing look. One evening, Eliza came over to me. She wanted to know about the women's club. I kept my cool and told her that her mom had made a mistake. I gave her a hug, trying to hide how I felt. I knew this moment would haunt me forever. Over time, things returned to normal in our house. At least, that's how it seemed to me. But it wasn't really the same. Even if Hessa didn't say it, we'd never go back to how things were before that day. I couldn't fully trust TR again, nor could I forgive or forget the profound disrespect she had shown me and our family. Love to borrow from Tina Turner, what does love have to do with any of this? She was clearly annoyed when she asked, so I let out another sigh to hide her frustration. Then I turned to face her. She kept looking at my eyes. "Do you realize how long it's been since we were close?" I said it. I told her I had the courage to do it. I had the bravery. "We haven't been close since I went on a date. I noticed she said you satisfy me physically, then sleep with me to ensure I'm happy. It feels purely physical, and you haven't hugged me since. I miss that closeness. You can't even say those words, baby." I replied, You went on a date with him and didn't come back until the next day. That seems pretty cheap and disgusting, don't you think? Yes, we had sex on Saturday night and it was great. He was gentle and caring, just like you. It was an unforgettable experience, which is why we're not having sex anymore. You gave him something that you promised was exclusively mine. You enjoyed everything, as you said. Come on, it was only one night, 2 days from now. From a statistical standpoint, this is nothing compared to the hundreds of days we'll spend married. We can forget it, if you're willing to try. She pleaded, thanks for the maths lesson. I've never seen our marriage as a maths problem. Would you feel the same if I did it with Mary Jo Young? Mary Jo Young is a divorced blonde with a nice figure who lives close by. Almost every woman on our street watches her closely with her husband. Wait, are you suggesting you want to marry Joe? No way! She exclaimed. Listen to your inner voice. I never said I wanted to marry Joe. I just wanted to check how you'd react if I did. I explained that she looked puzzled until it clicked, then her expression turned angry. I can read between the lines, so there's no need for words. I replied smugly, and she avoided eye contact. Do you realize that because of what happened, the other girl in the neighborhood bullied Eliza? They overheard their mothers calling you names, and it wasn't pleasant. I informed her that her anger shifted to disbelief at the news, and Eliza never mentioned it. She took a breath, processing, and then said, I'm truly sorry. Sorry isn't enough. You call the night. It was unforgettable, but for betrayal. I turned away and went to bed, unaware of her next move. Hester deserves credit over the next few months. She committed herself to being an exceptional mother. Traditionally, I had been the primary caregiver for our children, but suddenly Hester took on her share of responsibilities, driving the kids to their various activities and offering them warm support. It made me wonder if she had finally realized that prioritizing our family over her own desires was essential. Keeping us together, what a revelation. The children seemed to appreciate the extra attention, but once again my daughter demonstrated her remarkable receptiveness. Beyond her 8 years, Mom is really trying, Dad, she said to me one day. I hope she gets a proper apology for whatever she did wrong. I tried to respond with a genuine smile, acknowledging her keen awareness of the world around her. Everything appeared normal in the Wilkerson household. I worked diligently to maintain appearances. As for Hester, she seemed eager to make tremendous efforts. Not only to keep up appearances, but also to win back my trust. We were two people living together and enjoying certain benefits, despite her strong desire for normality. She expected me to give in eventually, somewhere deep down. I still had feelings for her, but I couldn't get over the 9 years she spent as the center of my life. She made things harder for herself by staying in touch with Senator Prick. I checked her phone calls and messages shortly after her date. She made sure they were clear, but she didn't realize. It was really easy to clone a phone and access all the communications. He seemed to keep in touch regularly while she tried to keep him at arm's length, at least for now. Can we schedule another date soon? I'll be in town. He texted her nearly a month ago. My husband is still upset from last time. She replied, I can't risk it. Needless to say, I wasn't impressed. A month later, we marked our 10th anniversary with a family trip to Chuck E. Cheese. The kids had a blast, but Hester didn't. She waited until the kids were playing games before expressing her disappointment. We've always marked our anniversaries just the two of us with a special night. You're changing the tradition because you're still upset. When did you become so petty and small? She asked again. The answer to that question is similar to many others about your date. You did this to me, to us, and to yourself. I replied. Can't you move past this? She pleaded. How often do you two communicate? I asked directly. She dared to smirk before reaching into her pocket, retrieving her phone and handing it to me. I tossed it high into the I understand you've been disloyal, but I also acknowledge your intelligence. I bet there's no evidence of your affair on that phone. Not since I confiscated it the first time, though. There are records of past texts and calls that you may not have initiated, but I've never heard you explicitly reject the person. Why is that? Her cheeks flushed as she looked away. I knew that was a rhetorical question. My career and my children provided stability. The thought of my colleagues' people often said I looked like I needed a good night's sleep, or even 6. I was convinced I was developing an ulcer. I was drinking a lot more than usual and sleep was elusive. There were nights when I lay awake for hours, staring at my wife, wondering what went wrong. She insisted on loving me and said her actions were separate from our relationship. She felt entitled to her night out with Senator Prick and showed no guilt for her behavior, only regret for the injuries she caused me. I waited for the other shoe to drop, but surprisingly, my mother-in-law became a source of strength during this challenging time. She repeatedly expressed regret for her daughter's actions. "We apologize, Reggie. We didn't raise her to be this selfish, but I really hope you can find a way to move past this." During one of her calls to check on me, she said, "I know what you're doing for the children." As I headed to the kitchen, I grabbed another cooler of beer to take outside. We were having our usual monthly summer picnic in the neighborhood. Outside, we had 2 grills going, offering a variety of hot and cold dishes, fruits, desserts, and drinks. The weather was perfect, sunny and 80 degrees Fahrenheit with hardly a breeze. The gathering had started a few hours ago and was expected to continue for another 5 or 6. These gatherings were always enjoyable for both kids and adults alike. As I moved through the house, I heard female voices from our home office, which was typically off-limits to non-family members. I was going to tell them to head to the family room or living area. While most of the action was happening outside, sometimes someone wanted to get away from it all indoors for some AC or quiet chats. This particular space was a bit of a problem. When Reggie takes charge, I can't help but think of him. He's assertive, driven, and he was focused on his goals, and sometimes I can't shake the memory of that night. "It's something I'll cherish forever," Hester declared to her companion as I approached the room. I stopped suddenly, my legs weakening. I almost stumbled. "How many people know I'm being betrayed?" I heard laughter. Apparently. I missed the rest of the conversation as I fought the urge to vomit. I was relieved to reach the restroom before getting sick. After tidying up, I brought the cooler of beer outside and gave 2 bottles to the guys. "Hey, are you okay?" "You seem a bit off," said John. I replied before drifting away. I stayed quiet for the rest of the gathering when Hester and her friends returned. I felt eyes on me and noticed smirks aimed my way. Maybe I was losing it, but it seemed like almost every woman at the barbecue was looking at me in a way that made me feel uncomfortable later that night, after putting the kids to bed and finishing the cleanup. I spoke to my wife about how I was feeling. She was sitting on a lounge chair, drinking a wine cooler, looking happy. I sat down next to her. "Did anyone show up today who doesn't know about your?" I asked her sincerely if she'd had an affair. She looked taken aback. I returned her gaze, pretending innocence. I might have mentioned it to a couple of girlfriends recently. It was quite the experience. She chuckled. "He's a charming senator." I couldn't help but share. "First you cheat, then you embarrass me in front of your friends. By sharing your infidelity with other husbands and branding me as a betrayed wife, you've made it clear that you don't care about my feelings. I'm not unfaithful and I won't tolerate being labeled as such." She yelled back that it was just one mistake and that she didn't sleep with a stranger in some motel. Her eyes flashed with intensity as she rose from her chair. She said she'd had enough. Her voice was getting louder. She said he'd been playing games for over a year. She said his wife had had an affair with another man. He was handsome and muscular. She said it was time to move forward. She said she wouldn't be held hostage by his insecurities any longer. She said if he couldn't let go, that was his problem. "You need to either file for divorce or face reality. I'm tired of living a lie with you, pretending to be the perfect couple." She suddenly started shouting and I was taken aback. I sat in stunned silence for what felt like hours. She had already walked away, leaving me alone, even though I had just regained consciousness. I'm naturally reserved and slow to react, which some people, including my wife, think is a weakness. I don't often panic or act hastily. It hurts me to think about not seeing my children every day, but I'm hopeful that I can salvage my family. I had prepared for the worst and had a lawyer ready to fight for me, so I took action first thing Monday morning. Hester was served with divorce papers at her workplace before the day was out, as expected. She wasn't pleased. 5 minutes after being served, my phone began buzzing incessantly. I ignored all her calls, anticipating the storm that would brew upon my return home. Hester was furious when she saw me. "You fool," she shouted. "Your fragile male ego is bruised and you humiliate me in front of my colleagues just as you embarrassed us in front of our friends and neighbors the other day." I replied, "You practically begged me to file, so I did." She gave me a look that said she thought I was an idiot, but she didn't say anything. I put my stuff down and went over to my kids. I told them I still loved them, even though we weren't living together anymore. Elise got it right away, but Nate didn't seem to understand. I knew he would. I was up against it, but I was confident my daughter would stick by me. Living in a no-fault state made the divorce process seem straightforward. She was expected to receive primary custody of the children, the house, child support and some alimony, but she contested vehemently for some inexplicable reason. Her lawyer used various tactics to drag out the proceedings, insisting on meetings and even suggesting marital counseling. What's the story? Have your actions spoken louder than your words? You say you love me, yet you've caused so much turmoil. And then you have the nerve to tell me. My friends say he's the best you've ever had. Why would I want to stay married to you if all I get is aggravation? I love my kids, but if I stay with you they'll only remember an embittered man. I said that in one session, but I love you. Are you fixated on one incident? Yes, he was exceptional, but it was I made a mistake. Please forgive me. She pleaded. I can't forget. I replied, you broke our vows and belittled their importance. I can't overlook that you made promises to me. I hadn't planned to do this. I hadn't meant to, but everyone has a breaking point. The beauty of a two-party political system lies in its contrast. Regardless of how you spin it, Senator Prick belongs to one side. The opposing party would welcome anything that tarnished his reputation. Over a year ago, after Hester's affair, I devised a backup plan. I sought the help of we got a lawyer in our city to approach the chairman of the opposing political party, who was keen to find anything that could damage the senator's chances of re-election and White House aspirations. Despite promising a hefty monetary reward, they were eager to hear what information the chairman had. We agreed that the evidence would only be revealed if the possessor requested it every month. My lawyer kept me informed about the chairman's persistent requests. This month, we were ready to fulfill the chairman's demands. The meeting, my first involvement, was in my lawyer's office after introductions. I took out a sealed plastic bag from my briefcase and placed it on the conference table. The chairman was surprised to see what was in the bag. He said, "Is that what I think it is? If you think it's evidence that could end Senator Prick's career, then yes." They looked at the bag as if it were precious gold bars. He didn't touch it, but he kept staring at it in amazement. That arrogant woman returned home. I went upstairs for a shower. I figured she probably assumed I wouldn't go through the basket since she handles the laundry, so I waited until I heard the water running before entering the bathroom and finding the underwear at the bottom of the hamper. Everyone these days is familiar with DNA from television, so I'm confident that when you test these, you'll find two distinct sets. Here's her toothbrush for DNA comparison. I assume you'll obtain the senator's sample for matching, unless you already have it. The chairman gave me a stern look and then glanced away, just as I thought he would. I knew he understood all the complexities of the case, so I didn't need to explain them again. However, I could see that he had a question in his expression. Why? Because she lacks the intelligence to realize she shouldn't cross me. She betrayed me, yet she arrogantly assumes I'll eventually forgive her. She's flaunting it in front of me. I don't care. I said, your career is finished. Thomas, damn you. Norberto, you're being foolish. How could your weak husband obtain evidence of our weekend together? I suspected he was aware, but there was evidence. A week after my meeting with the chairman, Norberto was furious on the phone with Hester. "I don't know what you're talking about." The phone call caught me off guard. I used to clone hers. I essentially admitted to her that I had tapped her phone some months ago and that they hadn't been communicating through that means, if at all. What did she say? "You're doing it wrong," she said when I called her back 90 minutes later. I got what she meant, but I was feeling vengeful. "I just ordered a pepperoni pizza with garlic bread. Why do you care what I eat?" "Wait, how do you know what I eat?" She snapped at me. I could tell she despised my foolish actions. While she may have seemed to view me as feeble, she knew better. Well, I guess being right about one thing out of two wasn't too bad. "I'm not sure how you managed it, but it seems you got when I got back to Senator Norberto. He threatened to rough me up for something you did, but he wouldn't say what." "Thanks for that. My parents are livid, and I think yours are too. Elise has been avoiding me, and you can't seem to grasp that what Thomas and I did was unrelated to our relationship." "Yes, about that," I started. Senator Norberto, who was seemingly assured of retaining his seat, suddenly dropped out of the Senate race 8 months before the election, citing significant mental fatigue with everything else going on in my. I hadn't looked at a woman in an appealing way for months until my daughter brought it up. She asked me when I planned to start seeing other women. My children joined me for the second weekend. "Linda's mom really wants to go out with you." I was stunned. My jaw must have dropped. I was lost in the chaos of divorce and hadn't thought much about my future. I was just focused on taking care of my kids every other weekend and a few weeks during the summer. Then Linda's mom brought it up and asked if I was okay with that. I was surprised, but I told her that I was. My dad had already told her that he'd heard her talking with Annie's mom, but I told her that I'd be fine with it. "I don't want you to be alone, but please not Marcy's mom. None of us kids liked her. The kids pick up on things." Linda's mom had been divorced from her for about 5 years. I had a terrible husband. She was a charming, lively blonde with curves who still carried the spirited vibe of her old cheerleading days. I had never considered she might be interested in me. When you're married, you don't think about other women. At least, I didn't. Elise was quietly keeping an eye on me. "It's okay, Dad. I'm almost 9. I understand about divorce and all. Nate and I will be fine. Just take care of yourself." It seemed like I was back in the dating scene. Linda's mom, Julie, became my first date after. I started dating again and it felt nice, though a bit obligatory. I told her I wasn't ready for anything serious yet, given my recent return to dating. She responded with a comforting smile, telling me I didn't owe an explanation to every person I dated. Julie offered valuable advice, like a crash course on navigating the dating scene. Julie also said that I'd probably catch the eye of other divorced moms among my children's friends, given my reputation as a good dad with a successful career. She blushed a bit when she mentioned the last part. I went on a date with Julie and a few other divorced moms. Sometimes I hardly thought about my ex. I told her about my wife Hester or our past marriage. I said I felt lonely at times, but I wasn't ready to consider reconciling with her. I refused to entertain the idea of her betraying me again. Hester, however, quickly dismissed her affair as a foolish mistake, promising never to repeat it. I said it was poor judgment, a lack of respect, and ultimately selfish. You prioritized an affair with the senator over your family's well-being. I could see she wanted to respond, but she didn't say anything. I thought she'd keep going, even though she couldn't justify what she'd done, especially now that contacting the senator seemed pointless. One Saturday during dinner with the kids and my ex-mother-in-law, I was told that he'd asked her never to contact him again. It seemed like you were involved in his decision to withdraw from the Senate election, and that she didn't intervene enough. I just raised an eyebrow and carried on eating quietly, not wanting to comment. A few months later, some guys from work suggested going to a new upscale bar with a dance floor. When I was married, I avoided Thursday evening outings like the plague, but now that I'm single, I find myself going out regularly. 4 of us found a table, ordered drinks, and soaked in the atmosphere. I noticed the two women as soon as they walked in. The first woman looked to be in her early 40s but dressed more like someone over 30, trying to look young. She wore a blue silk shirt that was slightly unbuttoned and a short skirt that showed off her long, toned legs. She had short dark brown hair and green eyes, and she seemed confident. Her friends seemed out of place in the pub setting. They were slightly older than her, maybe in their early 40s. They wore a sweater and skirt from a high-end store. She had shoulder-length silver blonde hair and dark eyes, and she looked really elegant and beautiful. She was sitting at a nearby table, and the other women quickly caught the attention of men who were eager to engage with them or dance with them. I couldn't shake the desire to dance with one of them, particularly the dark-haired woman. The woman with dark hair seemed ready for some fun, if not more. She readily accepted dances from every man who approached her. In contrast, the blonde woman danced sparingly and seemed more reserved in her movements. An hour later, I decided to invite the blonde woman to dance. However, as I approached her table, the brunette she grabbed my hand and pulled me onto the dance floor. I was completely captivated by her and forgot about her companion. We danced to upbeat songs until the tempo slowed, when she passionately kissed me. I was entranced. We left the club together and went to my place. Our passion carried over into the bedroom. That night, she told me a bit about her life. It turned out she and her friend were celebrating her recent divorce. Rosie was an amazing lover, and we dated for about a month before she said she wasn't ready to commit so soon after her divorce. I respected her perspective and we parted amicably. I've never had the chance to ask her about her friend since our first meeting. A few weeks later, I found myself alone in the bar of another upscale establishment, looking for some solace with a drink. It wasn't my turn to look after the children after a long week, so I had the weekend to myself. She walked into the room by herself, and everyone looked at her. She had a body like Megan from Stallion, with long brown hair that fell over her shoulders and down her back. She was wearing 4-inch stilettos, and she walked over to me. I felt like I'd stepped into heaven. I was trying to think of something clever to say. Before I could say anything, she looked me in the eye and asked for my drink order. I smiled back, feeling a little envious of her confidence. "Excellent choice," she said, her voice soft and seductive. A man with impeccable taste ordering the same undiluted drink as mine. She spent the evening sharing stories with me. The boutique marketing company she set up a few years ago was pretty impressive. She was captivating, intelligent, and ran a thriving business. Later, we went to her lovely apartment. She said she liked making love in her own bed, which is a common sentiment among women. We also chatted about psychology. She had an amazing body for her age, and I couldn't believe she was 45. Our first meeting was really memorable. She was a great kisser and I felt a connection with her that I hadn't felt with anyone since my date with Hester. Maria Washington was more open with me than Hester had ever been during our 9-year marriage. After a year of marriage, Maria told me she was devoted to her career and didn't want children. She also said she was open to casual relationships with different men, even though she had developed genuine feelings for me. I agreed to be friends with benefits for the next year. We met up once a month until Maria fell in love with a much younger man. "You're one lucky guy," my ex. Despite the divorce, my mother-in-law would still call me from time to time. We remained close, bound by mutual understanding and our grandchildren. I still referred to them as Mom and Dad. "Could I ask you a favor?" Ray inquired cautiously. "Of course, as long as it doesn't involve your daughter." I replied that it was a matter of courtesy to take my mother-in-law to the event. My ex-mother-in-law asked me to bring my personal assistant to their company Christmas party. She's a good person. She went through a divorce a few years ago from an abusive cheater, and I don't think she's dated anyone since. She needs a decent guy to show her that not all men are scoundrels. "I think you're a decent guy." My ex-mother-in-law said it's odd when your former mother-in-law asks you to bring your personal assistant to their Christmas party. "My mother-in-law tried to set you up on a date." "Mom," I interjected. "Please tell me she's not boring." Mom caught on to the humor and chuckled. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Reggie, you might even let us keep the kids for a night or two. She teased. Mom was spot on. I was pleasantly surprised. Cheryl, or Cheryline as she preferred, was a delightful bundle of charm with a well dash. She had a nice figure, was warm without being too outgoing, and had a cute habit of wrinkling her nose and squinting her green eyes when she was amused. She also had a great personality. I made a point of sticking close to Cheryl throughout the evening, giving her my full attention, just like I would have done with my ex. Cheryl seemed to appreciate the gesture, and while she engaged in conversation, she tended to defer to others, which I suppose was understandable given her upbringing. We sat with my in-laws at a table. My mom was as graceful as ever, while my dad was more reserved at first. I understood his demeanor, but he grew more open as the evening progressed. I surprised Jerry with my dancing skills, which I had honed to please my ex. My wife, Cheryl, who loved to dance, showed off her skills, especially when it came to faster dances. She complimented me perfectly in slow dances, as if we had been dancing together for years. I enjoyed the feeling of her body against mine as I escorted Cheryl to the door. She gave me a gentle kiss on the lips and handed me her phone number. I realized I owed my in-laws more time with their grandchildren. After 3 days, I called Cheryl to ask her out. She agreed to a date the following Friday at one of the city's best Italian restaurants, followed by an art exhibit at a nearby gallery. Cheryl dressed more provocatively for our date than she did at the Christmas party, which impressed me even more. We had a wonderful time and went out 3 more times before I felt it was time for her to meet my 8-year-old daughter. My daughter and I met his daughter and spent some time together. We played mini golf and had a picnic in a nearby park. Overall, it went well. The 2 girls bonded, but as expected for his age, my kid wasn't thrilled. He believed all girls had cooties. Sherry and I met several times a week. When I had my children, we did activities together. Everything was going well until a few weeks into the new school year. I received an unexpected phone call from Hester. I'm not sure what my girlfriend has been teaching your son, but he was in the principal's office today for fighting and his face is all beaten up. He's been suspended for 3 days and all he can say is that it all started with this Monique girl he keeps calling his sister. She was angry over the phone first and foremost. You have no right to call my girlfriend names like that. I'll come over after dinner and take Nate out for ice cream. Let's not jump to conclusions until we know exactly what happened. I responded calmly. I heard her sigh before she hung up. After dinner, I picked up Nate and took him to a small family. I took Nate to a small family-run ice cream parlor as soon as I got into my car. I conducted a thorough visual inspection and noticed he had a cut on his lip and a scratch on the left side of his face. He joked, "You should see the other guy." "What's the truth, Nathan Abraham?" I responded with his full name to emphasize the seriousness of the situation. He winced at the mention of his first and middle names. I told him to leave my sister alone. My sister was there too. He threw the first punch, then I punched him hard. They say I broke his nose. It made a loud crack and there was blood everywhere, he explained, trying to hide a grin. The boy who bothered Mo was 2 years older than Nate. Will Mo tell me the same story? I asked. Absolutely, Dad. I wouldn't have punched him if he hadn't thrown the first punch. I was just defending Mo. You always tell me to look out. I figured it applied to Mo too, so I told Ally. She's really small. Nate said Nate had a valid point. Monique inherited her mother's petite stature, making her at least half a head shorter than most of her peers. I'd always stressed to Nate the importance of looking out for his sister. It seemed he now saw Monique as part of his family. It was fascinating how innocence of childhood sometimes, experience can be outweighed by wisdom. I commend you for protecting Mo, but let's keep it between us. I told him I'll speak with the principal and see what can be done. You might want to update your mother on Mo's status. It seems you and Elise haven't been keeping her fully informed about my life, which I appreciate. However, it might be better coming from you and AAS. I said I mentioned that my 7-year-old understood completely. Kids mature quite quickly these days, and I thought I'd check in with you about your plans for the wedding. I know how amazing sure is. He was right about kids growing up fast. I reached out to the principal the next day. The school had a strict zero-tolerance policy for fighting, regardless of whether it was self-defense. They also had a zero-tolerance policy for bullying. As a result, the aggressor received a 6-day suspension. He got a day suspension after speaking to witnesses. I didn't agree with the policy, but I told him not to contest it. I also promised to propose to Sherry as soon as I could afford the ring. Things got complicated when Hester found out that Sherry was my mom's personal assistant. And that mom had arranged their first meeting. "Mom, you're not supposed to be on my side," Hester said later. "Mom, there's no your side," she replied. "You messed that up, so why let a good man go to waste? Carolyn is a wonderful woman and a great friend. She deserves someone." Like Reggie's mom said, Hester's scream was pretty horrifying. She told me about the incident while my kids were enjoying Sherry's company. My daughter in particular seemed to admire her nurturing demeanor towards me. Sherry had a natural inclination to fulfill my desires, making me feel like the master of my domain. This encouraged me to treat her like my queen. I treated her like my queen. Elise seemed to enjoy watching the affectionate banter between Sherry and me. "I'm not sure if you two are endearing or nauseating," Elise remarked one day, "but I enjoy being around to witness it." A couple of months later, our wedding only included our 3 children, my parents and my ex. My ex-mother-in-law was also there, along with my in-laws. The court clerk who officiated the ceremony was surprised when my ex-mother-in-law stood as Sarah's maid of honor, and it's quite a story. I laughed when she asked if I'd ever seen the Spanish Inquisition in the classic British comedy Monty Python's Flying Circus. But, to be honest, nobody expects an inquiry from a federal marshal either. I was completely taken by surprise. On a Monday morning, 2 officials turned up at my office. It seemed the authorities were upset about a former senator having a fight and hurting himself in the restroom of a fancy restaurant in Houston, Texas. My name, along with that of several other AGs, came up as potential suspects. I'm not sorry to hear about the senator's troubles. Nobody deserves it more. I told the disgruntled marshals, "You do realize that the fool slept with my then-wife almost 4 years ago. If I had any intentions, I wouldn't have acted long before now." They replied with sarcasm. The federal agents didn't stop there. A week later, a reporter from the Associated Press showed up at my office looking for details about the incident. It seemed like he'd found a confidential list of 26 women the senator had affairs with during his time in office. At this point, a few people in the office knew about Hester's relationship with the senator, though I didn't make it public over the years. Hester probably told more people than I did, as she was proud of what she'd done. But I couldn't help wondering about her level of pride when the news of the senator's misconduct emerged, implicating her as one of his lovers. "Why did you disclose that to him?" She practically yelled at me over the phone. "I didn't. He informed me that your name was on the senator's roster. All I did was confirm the accuracy of your inclusion on the list. I wasn't going to fabricate to spare you embarrassment. You from embarrassment and promiscuity. I am not promiscuous." She screamed at me before I ended the call. I must confess I chuckled. I also thought about taking an extended vacation when the news article broke. She messed up, literally, and yet I was going to suffer an embarrassing fallout as well. Cherry talked me out of that idea. She said I shouldn't get involved in any confrontation and stick to the truth. She cheated on you, divorced you, and now it's time to move on. Unfortunately, my kids were going to have to endure verbal bullying for the remainder of their school years. We'd have to explain that their mother was a self. I also felt sorry for my ex-in-law for years to come. We'd become close friends with the Laws after the article came out, so we invited them to stay with us in the house we'd bought. They mostly stayed indoors and avoided answering their phones during that time. I adore my daughter, and I understand the parental emotions, but I'm ashamed that she thought it was okay to engage in promiscuous behavior. Dad confessed, and said that no father wants his daughter to be perceived as such. As time went on, the scandal died down and life went back to normal. My kids started spending more time at our house with Cherry and me. It wasn't formal, but our home naturally became a gathering spot for the neighborhood kids. Hester was initially against it, but I think things smoothed over. I also made sure that Nate and Lise kept in touch with Hester to stop her from accusing me if I didn't want to alienate her children again. When they were with me, their mom visited a lot, which helped to relieve tensions. We didn't discuss Hester much, but she was still their mom. They also didn't mention her, out of respect for Sherry, who they now called Mom. At first, I sensed discomfort from Hester's parents when the kids started calling Cherry Mom. However, that soon faded, as they had been close to her. Even before we got married, I was so caught up in the upheaval in my life and my family that I barely paid attention to what was going on with Hester. I knew she dated from time to time based on what the kids said, but I was really surprised when Elise announced one afternoon that her mother was engaged. I felt a bit sad at first, thinking about what might have been, but then I felt a comforting embrace and my sadness turned into joy for what I now had.